All right, we will get October 24th, DRC started. For this DRC, we're just continuing
And
microphone. So, continuing the discussion that we've had at previous DRCs regarding access requirements. Kind of done some discussion, had different conversations with different folks, UDOT and such, and we've kind of, in an effort to try to help the discussion, I've tried to put in a bullet point, kind of 5 items, I think that kind of sums up what we've talked about. And that's kind of what I've got brought up here to kind of show those. The first option is, yeah, there's no change. We don't need to, requirements that are currently on the books. So 250 ADT would require a second point of access.
John, you need to make sure that microphone's right in front of you, not to the side. Just so everybody's aware, the microphones are very directional, very cone related on the end of it. So we're going to get some new cones, but right now you need to basically be right in front of the microphone to make it work.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that better, Emily? Yep. Okay. So the second option would be to increase the ADTs for a second point of access to 500 ADT from 250 to 500. Third option would be to increase the ADT requirements for second access to 500, again from 250 to 500, but then allow an exception along UDOT right-of-way. So that would be along Main Street and State Road 198 as you're heading north out of on the east side of Santaquin here. And then properties along the UDOT road can only have an access of 300 per UDOT. In our conversation with UDOT, they can only have that one point of access at 300 feet, 30 feet of width as a minimum on there. Another option would be to basically remove that code and remove and not regulate access requirements on streets. I think the fifth option tries to kind of combine some of those. It says require a larger 50-foot wide access on UDOT roads, but restrict that to the normal access to basically 30-foot wide, and then provide a crash gate or a chain or something along those lines to restrict that from a full 50-foot wide access all the time to kind of UDOT standard 30-foot wide, and then that extra 20-foot could be open in the event of emergency to get fire access into it or allow egress or vehicles to leave the site. So I believe that kind of summarizes some of the options that we've discussed previously, and so with that, I would open up to discussion or thoughts on those items or any others that you may want to add to that.
So John, I'm going to take a minute here and just discuss, we did meet with UDOT so that the staff and the public and the council and mayor are aware. John and I met with UDOT extensively on this to try and understand, making sure we understood their requirements. They have requirements, everything from requiring 150-foot spacing between accesses, which in most of the locations that we're looking at for this type of a scenario, that 150 feet can't even be met because you've got existing accesses that are on the borders of properties on either side, and you're never going to make that. You're just not going to make 150 feet. They recognize that and can deal with that on a case-by-case basis. The other thing that they have is they do allow a 30-foot access. They'll allow up to a 50-foot access for certain uses, like if there's semi-trucks coming in there on a daily basis and they need a wider access. I'm thinking of like the Sinclair gas station where they have a truck come in there and fill up the tanks and stuff. They will allow for a wider 50-foot wide access, but it's pretty limited. Not everybody's going to get a 50-foot wide access. Whether this last option right here might be able to work with them, that may or may not work. essentially let me, one more thing on UDOT is that they have a stipulation, and if you have a change in use on a site, and the change in use is triggered by up to 500 ADTs, average daily trips, then they look at it and they will evaluate it accordingly. They basically don't have in their repertoire, they don't necessarily have like what we have in code to say X, Y, and Z gets, A, B, and C. They basically have indicated to us they're going to look at it on a case-by-case basis. So there may be, and likely is, no way for us to perfectly correlate with what UDOT is going to require. And therefore, any city street or UDOT road that's within the city is going to have, that has UDOT purview, they're going to, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a car wash or a drink place or a lube place or whatever it is, UDOT is going to look at that on a case-by-case basis and make their determination according to their requirements and what they can or cannot do with those requirements. Everything from federal highways to access limitations to their biggest concern, much like ours, is public safety, right? If we have cars stacking up out on the state highway trying to get into a drink spot or a lube place or a car wash, that's something that they just can't accept because it's not something that provides a fair amount of safety in their mind and our minds as well. So with that said, that was one of the purposes of why we tabled last time, was to take it back to UDOT and have that conversation with them. And it appears that we're not going to be able to put our code, no matter what we do, perfectly in line with theirs or what their requirements are, because their requirements are going to be determined on a case-by-case basis. Another thing that was done is staff went and visited, for instance, a car wash. We've talked about potential for a car wash, and we know at least one place on Main Street wanted a car wash but couldn't have the double access, to get a better feel for what those types of businesses end up generating. A car wash in an adjacent city generates somewhere around 770 cars a day on average in September, and could be as much as over 1,200 cars a day on a Saturday or a weekend or something like that. So keep that in mind, and that 500 ADT may or may not even apply depending on what the use is. That seems like a lot of cars, and it is a lot of cars, but that's just the nature of those types of uses. So I just want to make sure for the public and the council and the mayor, as this proceeds forward, they understand the background of where we're at and where we're going, and whatever is recommended here today, if anything, then that's the background of where from the last time that we met.
I like the option coming in line with UDOT of the 500 ADTs. That way we're kind of doing the same thing that the state's doing. Out in left field, we're not out in right field, we're kind of right in line with them. Increasing it a little bit, the majority of the properties on Main Street or the area we're looking at are not that big. So I think 500 ADTs along with UDOT's option is probably the best.
So to be clear, we typically can't have a UDOT option to just have it be a review process. We have to have X, Y, and Z in our code to be able to say, do you meet it or do you not meet it? We can't go as a city, my understanding, Jason, you can correct me, but I don't believe that we can go with an option like what UDOT does to review it on a case-by-case basis.
I think it's safe to say we want to avoid that because we don't want so much discretion to be taken as we are arbitrary and capricious. We are picking and choosing based on whatever mood we're in that day. I think the more criteria, the more language that we can have behind our decisions is the better.
The more defined. I
mean, we've done that lately where we open it up to a little bit of discretion, but we still have some guidelines of how we make those decisions. So that's the thing that's hard with this is I think we'd love to. Frankly, most of what we do would be great to go on a case-by-case basis, but and I'm not the city attorney, but my understanding is legally that gets a little bit precarious because have some standards that people expectations that people can go off of.
So they either meet the code or they don't meet the code.
Right.
Well, I guess what I mean is if you increase the average ADTs to 500, then if it's along UDOT's gonna make the decision because then we're pushing it to them. But if we increase our, from the, 250 up to 500, and then that along property along Main Street or 198 Road, now it's UDOT's decision. Trying to help increase the ADTs for the majority of the businesses. Everything on Main Street typically is going to be a change of use because you're going from residential to a commercial piece of property. And so then it triggers UDOT's review. Now, unless they buy property to the north or the south to make those lots bigger, the footprint's pretty small. And I don't see some small area pushing more than 500 ADTs. It's like a car wash or a larger parcel.
Well, you're exactly right, and that is that a commercial use is gonna be a change in use, because like you say, most of them are residential, and moving from that. But the reality of it is that what does that look like? So let's say that we do change it from 250 to 500, which I'm not opposed to, that's fine, whatever the recommendation is moving forward. But what goes along with that? Do we still require them to have a 50-foot access with up to 500, or can they do a single access with 500? That seems like a lot. If you look at 500 cars a day at an average hour, typically you don't spread it out over an 8-hour business period, but that's a car every minute basically which is not necessarily a bad thing, but that's not how it works out. It doesn't spread out to be a car over every minute. What it ends up being is that you get a few cars in the off hours, and then on the peak hours you get 10 times as much, right? You might have 10 cars per minute in a 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. or 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. when people are coming home and going, depending on what the business is. So again, I'm not opposed to it, but just recognizing that are there other things that need to go along with that to just, in other words, are we just saying, okay, let's just go from 250 to 500 and that's the trigger for a second access, or are there other requirements that go along with that, up to 500 access?
Maybe we just trust UDOT, right? Maybe we say, okay, it's your road. We know there's queuing issues. You have engineers. You take a look at it, and you decide what access you're going to allow to that piece of property.
Well, so the problem with that is that while it is a UDOT road, it's still within the city, and we still have zoning codes and other codes that have to be met. I don't believe that it would be in our best interest to acquiesce the whole thing to UDOT.
So let me jump in there, because I actually agree a little bit with what Jason's saying. I think the key difference here is public safety. UDOT is not going to maybe think about public safety in response to an emergency as much as we are. I mean, traffic engineers are traffic engineers. It's not like, the city's regulations are going to be that much groundbreaking more than UDOT's or vice versa or whatever. I guess my input on this is after thinking a lot about this, from a planning perspective, I lean towards the option of just removing it from the code, not regulating access requirements. I think businesses are going to make sure they have the adequate access themselves. However, with that said, that's the planning perspective. I'm going to defer to public safety on what they feel like is needed for access. I don't want to speculate what an emergency situation would look like or how often it happens or anything like that. That's why we have public safety. So like I say, I'm going to defer to public safety on this one, because I think this is really a safety requirement. I don't know as if there is enough traffic that's going to, particularly on Main Street. I guess I should say that with a caveat that I think on Main Street it's a little bit different animal. Elsewhere, I think if there's space, we want to encourage good circulation and access and that. But this whole discussion we've had has been based on Main Street, and with the limitations and with the complexity of Main Street, I don't even know why we have a requirement on Main Street except for public safety purposes. And again, that's where UDOT is probably lacking in some of their their observation of this is not thinking of the local public safety needs and ways to help them get access in an emergency. So that's my input.
So I agree with you, Jason, and that is because UDOT's personnel are not the ones that are responding to a car fire, right? We had just a couple months ago, within the last couple of months, we had a car fire in a Main Street business parking lot that had 2 accesses. If we had only one access, that could have hampered the ability for police and fire especially in that case, to get in there and fight it at the same time moving other cars away from it, right? If you've got public safety trying to get into a single access where there's a car fire and then all, 40, 50, 100 other cars trying to get out that same access, that's a challenge. That really, so I concur with you, Jason. It's likely, more than anything, it's likely a public safety requirement.
And maybe I should take a step back. If there was one thing that I'd want to regulate in this, it wouldn't necessarily be the number of access. It'd be more of the traffic movement, maybe like a right in, right out only, if that poses an issue for the circulation and flow on our main street. But outside of that, I don't really see a situation on Main Street where there's going to be that much traffic. There's not enough land there, or there's not a parcel big enough to create such a difficult situation. That might come with more growth and something that we need to reassess years, if not decades down the road. But for now, I just don't see the reason for the requirement, except for if public safety, has a need there. And then, Norm touched on this a little bit, but I think, again, this is a recommendation we're making. This is not even typically part of the process. DRC usually doesn't weigh in on legislative recommendations. However, because of the technical nature of this and public safety components of this, that's why it's here. So that would be kind of my position is I'm really indifferent on most of those options there, but when it comes right down to it, I don't see the need to nitpick, except for if there's a need to facilitate public safety.
Will UDOT let us have a ride-in, ride-out? Can we put that stipulation on?
And they're going to review it on a case-by-case basis. So again, trying to put our code in perfectly in line with what they're going to come up with is going to be nearly impossible, because they're going to review it on a case-by-case basis. So to go along with what Jason was saying in public safety, some of the things that we can do with our zoning and with our code is queuing, for instance. We have queuing requirements, and we actually worked with several other businesses about this queuing issue to get them to change some things as we went through the design process, as we went through the review process, and they were willing to do that because they understood the design needs and the public safety as well. And so we can continue to do that, whether it's a right in, right out, there's an island there or no island, or it's painted, or there's signs, or whatever it happens to be. Again, that's going to have to be approved by UDOT at their discretion, right? It isn't, there isn't a book that says, okay, you get this for that, or whatever with UDOT. They have, again, federal highways. They probably have, we have 6 or 7 folks here right now. They probably have 24 folks that look at everything from traffic circulation to signage to safety to pedestrian to everything else that goes along with what we're talking about. So again, I think we can help with some of that public safety by queuing and those other things. But again, I think it does come back to public safety.
And Jason, that's a great point. This is not impacting, or this does not change our queuing requirements.
Right.
This is strictly just access. And so they're still going to have queuing requirements. And if queuing is a problem and it spills onto Main Street, that's still
An
there.
issue. Yeah.
We're not talking about that. That's not being impacted today at all. I think the right-in, right-out, like I say, I'm not necessarily a big proponent of that today. I could see that maybe coming down the road. If you look at UDOT-owned main streets or state streets elsewhere in the state, they eventually get to that point where it's just, they put a median down the road so that you can't even, it's kind of a right-in, right-only just by nature of you can't turn left,
Yeah.
So
It's access control.
we may get to that point because our main street, depending on how we grow to the west, could become a busy enough road that it's impossible to try and turn left, or you know what I mean. So I'm not a stickler for putting that in right now, and I think we still have regulations that are there that are gonna work, but I think, yeah, I mean, and we can say that, but it doesn't even necessarily need to be safe, because we still have queuing requirements and that's in our parking code.
And we could look at that, and the site plan, right?
Yep, and that's all still there, still applicable. The topic that we're addressing is just the number of accesses.
Can we handle public safety issues in the site plan? I guess we could help with that, right?
Well,
Would that
and
be
that's a good
possible,
point.
Ryan?
I mean, again, I'm not legal counsel, but usually if it's regarding general health, safety, and welfare of the community, then yeah, they can chime in on things like that. But that becomes a lot more difficult about language to back it up.
Some kind of parameters.
You know, even though the fire chief says that, doesn't necessarily mean that it may be true, and it could, I mean, anything could be contested. But I think having language to back up, our public safety on those decisions is the way to do it, if we feel it's that big important, or if we feel that it's gonna be that impactful.
I'd like to hear from our public safety.
I'm not a fan of removing the code, period, and just doing away with it. In case of that is a developer looking to go to the south with a potentially large development and asked, hey, do I only have to have one road in? Well, with the size of that potential development, one road in is a horrible thing. And so just remove it completely out of the code. Now, yeah, we're looking at Main Street right now, but what about a future development with one road in, one road out? We go right back to the Summit Ridge issue.
We're not talking roads, we're talking access.
Right,
off of
correct.
a road.
One access into a potential development.
Yeah, Summit Ridge was not just one access. That's a large development. It's a road.
Correct, but it had one access in, one access out.
This would be comparable to having a church parking lot with one access, not
So-
Summit Ridge.
Yeah,
Entire
and taking that
development.
completely out of the code, saying we're not going to regulate it, I disagree with 100%.
So Jason, not Jason, sorry, Ryan, I think what I'm hearing you say is, for instance, we annexed or changed a code on the south end of town where they could potentially have 400, 500,000 square feet of office warehouse space. What I'm hearing you say is that in that situation, you would not be, you would be completely opposed to having a single access.
Absolutely. Matter of
Okay,
fact, that
and
developer-
I think that we concur even from an engineering and
No.
a circulation and those types of
agree.
things. So let me ask you a question on this. Could this, should this only apply on
Main
UDOT
Street.
roads? Main Street or something of that nature that is controlled by UDOT? In other words, should we keep the 250? I agree with Jason in the more local roads, on the side roads, 250 on a more local road that's not 100 feet wide and 5 lanes potentially in the future with Main Street seems to be a better fit. So do we just change the 500 on Main Street, for instance, for now and ease into it and figure out where that goes? That would be what my recommendation would be, because that's really what the impetus of what the mayor's having us look at here is, the Main Street and having businesses and being business friendly and that kind of thing. So I think that I agree with you, Ryan, in this case down on the south end of town, absolutely not. If you got 500,000 square feet of office warehouse space and a single access, this just isn't gonna work. So that's a very good case for only doing this on a limited basis to maybe just Main Street, or maybe just Main Street and Highway 198 going to the north or whatever, right? Just UDOT roads is what I'm
I would be fine just on going away from it on UDOT controlled.
well,
198
or
Main
going to
with
500 is what,
500,
yeah,
correct.
for
on
a
those
single
two roads.
access and nothing else to go along with it. Just a access of a maximum of 500 with a single access on Main Street or on UDOT roads is really, is that where you're going? If you were to make a recommendation right now, is that the recommendation you would
Correct.
make? Okay. So again, just trying to make sure that I understand the parameters.
Okay, just on those two roads, because that's the area we're looking at. But one thing I think needs to be brought up, if they develop, there's got to be some work with the developer, heavy emphasis and potential.
But like Jason was saying,
repercussions.
we still have the option of controlling it within a site development.
Right. Everything from queuing to the number of parking to the drive aisle widths, all of those things still apply and will help us to have the on-site safety that we're talking about. It's just, like Jason says, this is strictly focused on access, the number of accesses, right? So I think that might be a good fit, Ryan, if you were to make a motion like that to say, okay, let's try this on Main Street and see where it goes and move it to the 500, that UDOT will, kind of triggers a heavier, more intensive UDOT review. And then we are in line with UDOT, at least on that aspect of it. And then our other code continues to govern in everything from queuing to parking to drive aisle width to how far away the drive aisles have to be from the building, placement of fire hydrants, all of that kind of stuff is still within our code. So I think that might be a good fit. Kason, do you have some thoughts? Okay. You seen that seems to be doable from the police side of things. Okay. Again, safety, right? Public safety.
I think I've highlighted kind of what we landed on there. Basically, increase the ADT to 500, only applicable on UDOT right-of-ways. Still, again, site queuing, internal circulation, not necessary to govern, but are still in place.
So, John, I'm not sure that second sub-bullet point is even needed there. Those are things that we already have in our code, like Jason said, and we just...
It's mostly just to summarize kind of what we're...
Sure.
The understanding that we're on there.
Sure.
And then no change to ADTs on. That would include any commercial development on the south end of town, development that may occur on Highland Drive.
So John, I think that it's not necessarily a change in ADT, it's a change in ADT to 500, or on the bottom bullet point, there would be no change to the ADT for a single access within the city-owned right-of-way. For single access, right? And the same thing on the upper one, the very first bullet point, or the second one on the page is the 500 ADT for a second, yeah, you've got that, okay. So we need to massage that wording, but I think
Correct,
that.
but that's to try to just help.
So just to make sure I'm clear on what you're saying, we're looking to increase ADT, or what you're writing down is increasing ADT just for Main Street, just for you. I guess it'd be SR 198 as well, but essentially just UDOT is what we're looking to, UDOT right away, we're looking to increase 500 ADT for. Right. Okay.
I think that's good wording, John. UDOT
basically,
control.
so everything stays the same, except we're adding a new provision that on Main Street, it's 500 ADT is the kicker for a second access. Yeah, that's basically it. So I think, I think that's a lot of words to just say we're keeping everything the way that it is, except we're allowing for 500 ADT to be the kicker for a second access requirement on UDOT right away.
Yeah, I think that's, that seems like that's where we're going, so that seems accurate. And then you and Ryan would work on wording to put into some type of an ordinance or whatever to send it to Planning Commission from here, right?
That's a piece of cake.
Yeah.
Like I say.
I guess what I'm saying is this isn't the wording necessarily that would go to Planning Commission. It would just be an ordinance format.
Can I make a motion?
Ready.
I'll make a motion that the DRC recommends to the Planning Commission and City Council that they leave the second access requirement language the same in our code, except that we add a provision that when it's UDOT right away, the second access requirement becomes 500 average daily trips.
I'll second that motion.
So for clear, or to be more clear with it, so on our streets, it could still be 250.
It would still be 250.
It would be.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep. Everywhere else, we're keeping everything the exact same except for UDOT right away. Now we're lessening it to 500 average daily trips is for needing a second access. And
So-
that, I guess that's consistent with UDOT standard, and then we push things to UDOT and they look at it more in the way.
So just for clarity as well, for instance, a car wash, what our understanding is, that still wouldn't allow a car wash. That might allow some other businesses, but the particular car wash brand or the national chain that was discussed, they wouldn't be able to go there because they're far beyond that 770 or something like that on an average day, and then 1,200 on a weekend, so.
And just as a reminder, I think people brought this up, and I appreciate Ryan looking into it, just to kind of get a sense for himself, but we don't necessarily go do like a traffic study to know what those counts are. We really rely on the applicant to tell us what they're going to experience from an average daily trip number. Now, I think if we see that and maybe we disagree with it based on what the use is, then maybe we can go a little bit further.
Right.
But just so people know, that's how we determine ADT, is we really look for the applicant to tell us their anticipated number of trips per day.
And typically with that, we require them to give us some type of data from another location that's
Right.
close by or something of that nature, so that we have something to compare it to.
Right.
So you
Okay.
have a motion and a second.
We do have a motion and a second. No changes to the motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. And so it'll go on to planning to get those, and we're gonna get those scheduled for review by the Planning Commission and City Council, so. Okay, the next items on the agenda are the approval of the meeting minutes for September 12th and September 26th.
I'll make the
Motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second his.
Sounds good. Covered both September 12th and September
Yes.
26th in your motion? Okay. Any other comments? If not, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved, and if there's nothing else that needs to be discussed in front of the DRC, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We are adjourned at 10:34 a.m.